and he does a phenomenal job. So we're very appreciative that he's been able to join us. It's his senior year, I think. Is that right, Dane? Yeah. Uh-huh. So he does a great job, and he'll be monitoring the chat as well as I will. And meantime, I want to introduce you to Jill Duffy, who has kindly joined us today when her predecessor had to find a new way of making a living. Jill served as Humboldt Waste Management Authority Executive Director from 2012, and after 9 years retired in November of 2021. The highlights she accomplished during her tenure include completion of several multi-million-dollar projects, the $4.5 million cleanup and restoration of the former Cummings Road burn ash site, the $7.5 million construction closure of the Cummings Road landfill, the acquisition of 400 acres of timberland surrounding the landfill, securing 10-year long-term solid waste transportation and disposal agreements, not just once, but twice following early contract termination, the 10-year curbside collection and processing for recycling materials agreement, establishment of a carpet recovery and recycling program and the mattress collection and recycling program, multiple tire amnesty collection programs, reuse of household products program, the elimination of fees for the disposal of electronic waste for residents, and the expansion of residential hazardous waste collection from 1 day a month to 6 days per week at no charge, entering into an agreement with the City of Fortuna, a non-member entity, in 2021 to enable household hazardous waste disposal services at the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station, and coordinating and securing consulting services to assist all Humboldt jurisdictions with SB 1383 compliance. That's quite a collection, but I decided to list them all because it gives you an idea of what's been going on since 2012 when Jill joined HWMA. In late August 2022, the HWMA Board of Directors appointed HWMA's Director of Operations, Eric Keller Heckman, as HWMA's Interim Executive Director. To maintain stability of HWMA operations and assist with ongoing regional planning efforts, Jill agreed to step out of retirement to assist HWMA part-time as their interim director of operations. And I'm very grateful to her for stepping up and stepping in for Peter Fuller. She has so much background on this, and I'm delighted she's able to be here today. So Jill, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Jane. I'm going to go ahead and put the screen share on, and I'm going to look for somebody to tell me that you've received it, or that, not that you received it, but that you can see it. That's word. Dane, can you see this okay?
We see it.
It's on.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I'm going to do a little configuring here because I've got lots of other things around me. Okay, so thank you very much for all joining this afternoon. It's a nice surprise, and I have to say that one of the real benefits come out of this pandemic lifestyle is that we can do things via Zoom, and we're seeing higher and better participation, including even in our board meetings. You know, everybody's just more engaged. They're typically in the convenience of their home, and it's been a really, you know, it's probably one of the beneficial pieces of going through a pandemic. So this afternoon, our presentation is going to be somewhat broad and yet somewhat detailed. So we're first going to begin with two primary areas. One is I've incorporated videos that encompass the landscape of responsibilities and activities that HWMA has been involved in. And these videos are available online. More towards the end of the presentation, I've given Dane the links, and they'll be available over in the chat. So we'll touch very briefly on solid waste, materials diversion, curbside recycling, and then I'll have a short opportunity for some questions that I would imagine will be more specific to solid waste, materials diversion, and some of the recycling questions. Then we're going to go ahead and move into a short overview of SB 1383, which is the Short-Lived Climate Pollutant Reduction Strategy Act. And we'll also hit on the coordination activities that local jurisdictions are currently involved in. And then we'll have opportunity for more questions and perhaps some discussions that you may have. So I want to begin by just outlining that the California Constitution grants powers to cities and counties to make and enforce local police, sanitary, and other ordinances which are not in conflict with the general laws of the state of California. And then the California Public Resources Code sets forth that the cities and counties have authority to regulate solid waste within their jurisdictions. Underneath the Public Resource Code section, they require that every local government agency meet state mandated targets for diversion of solid waste from landfills. And it's the responsibilities of the city and the counties to implement those state regulations. They do that through the establishment of ordinances and resolutions, as well as entering into agreements or sometimes permits with franchise haulers. And then they are responsible to submit annual waste reports to what is now known as CalRecycle for compliance purposes. Now, Humboldt Waste Management Authority is a joint powers agreement, and these cities and counties, so interested public agencies, they can negotiate a formal agreement that specifies what powers that they are interested and willing to share, and other mutual accepted arrangements. And this is known as a joint powers agreement. HWMA was formed in 1999 by 6 of the 8 jurisdictions in Humboldt. So straight off the bat, you can see HWMA is kind of quasi a regional entity. We're not a full regional entity because we don't have Trinidad and we don't have Fortuna. The purposes for HWMA's formation was, 1, to secure solid waste disposal for member agencies. And then we manage the landfill closure and diversion programs for our member agencies. And then we also conduct planning for HWMA programs and diversion services. So other joint power agreement entities that you may be more familiar with include places like the Humboldt Transit Authority, Humboldt County Association of Governments, the Redwood Coast Energy Authority, and then there are several others on top of that. Humboldt County also has the AB 939 Solid Waste Local Task Force Group. This group was established by state law in 1989 with the passage of AB 939, which is why it's oftentimes called the AB 9 Local Task Force. And the group is comprised of jurisdictional staff. There's 1 member for each city and the county, and they are responsible for identifying new and ongoing solid waste management issues of countywide or regional concern. Their charge is to assist and advise jurisdictions and to facilitate the development of solid waste collection systems, processing facilities, and marketing arrangements so that they can serve more than 1 jurisdiction within the region. This is the first of the 2 videos. It is 11 minutes long. And we'll go ahead and begin. Thumbnail sketch of how trash is handled in Humboldt and the relationship between HWMA and the franchise haulers who perform the curbside collection services. Humboldt Waste Management Authority was established by a joint powers agreement between the County of Humboldt and the cities of Arcadia, Blue Lake, Eureka, Ferndale, and Rio Dell in November of 1999. The authority is responsible for the operation of the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station and Eureka Recycling Center, contracting for long-distance solid waste transportation and disposal services, closure and post-closure responsibilities of the Cummings Road landfill, and providing recycling and waste diversion services and programs to our member agencies. Each city and county enters into exclusive franchise agreements for solid waste and other services, for example, green waste, recycling, and bulky item pickup, with a waste collection company, and each jurisdiction's franchise agreement is unique. Curbside collection companies in Humboldt include Humboldt Sanitation, Recology, Blue Lake Garbage, and Tom's Trash. Additionally, some of these companies may provide staffing for operation of the rural container sites located in the smaller communities throughout Humboldt County. Humboldt Sanitation also operates a private transfer station in McKinleyville, and Recology operates a private transfer station in Fortuna and manages the Redway transfer station under a contract with the county. These 3 transfer stations also receive materials under state, tribal, and federal contracts, the City of Fortuna and the City of Trinidad, and other self-hauled material, and that tonnage is not under HWMA's flow control.
Would you like me to make some more?
HWMA owns and operates the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station, which includes our tip floor to receive solid waste and curbside collected recyclable. The Hawthorne Street facility receives an average of 170 tons per day of solid waste from Eureka, Arcata, Blue Lake, and the surrounding unincorporated communities. The general public also disposes of their material at our facility. HWMA does not operate any curbside collection services. All material is brought to our transfer station. Solid waste is then loaded into semi-truck trailers, which then transport the waste to the Dry Creek landfill located near Medford, Oregon. An average of 13 semi-trucks per day are dispatched for the 180-mile trip one way to dispose of the waste. The Dry Creek landfill opened in 1974 and is a fully permitted municipal solid waste landfill. Waste is disposed into cells which are designed and engineered using a liner system that includes layers of 60mm texture HDPE material, low permeability soil, and a leachate collection and removal system. Each lined cell that is constructed has approximately 3 years of capacity and costs approximately $380,000 per acre to construct. When a cell has reached its capacity, it is covered with a system similar to the liner, and it costs approximately $350,000 per acre to close. Dry Creek Landfill currently services southwest counties of Oregon, including Coos, Curry, Josephine, Jackson, and Klamath counties, as well as Northern California counties, Humboldt, Del Norte, and Siskiyou County. The Dry Creek Landfill is a regional facility with an active methane gas collection and control system in place. This gas-to-energy plant runs on methane which is generated at the landfill, and it generates enough electricity to power 3,200 homes in the Medford area 24/7. A major project that Dry Creek is looking towards is to convert the methane to a renewable natural gas in order to power their collection fleet of 50 trucks and other local fleets in Jackson County. HWMA is also responsible for the closure and post-closure monitoring of the Cummings Road landfill. Many North Coast communities once had their own open-air burn and refuse locations, many of which have been long forgotten. But the Cummings Road landfill was larger in scale and operated for several decades, and there's a responsibility to monitor and maintain this former landfill. The 33-acre Cummings Road landfill originally began as a privately owned open-air burn refuse disposal site, which operated from 1933 until 1969. Faced with a diminishing capacity and a corrective action order by the North Coast Regional Water Quality Control Board, the landfill was slated for closure in 1998. In 1999, HWMA was formed, and in addition to the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station, purchased the landfill to develop necessary engineering and design, perform the construction cap closure, and to conduct 30 years of post-closure maintenance and monitoring. Phase 1 construction closure was conducted in the summer of 2012. In April of 2013, HWMA and Recology were jointly issued a cleanup and abatement order for the cleanup of a 6.4-acre area outside of the landfill that contained old burn ash debris that straddled our two adjacent properties. Although neither party was responsible for creating the waste, as property owners, we were responsible for cleaning the property and proper disposal of the material. Over 92,000 cubic yards of material was removed at a cost of about $4 million and placed into the Phase 2 area of the landfill, and construction was completed on that site in October of 2014. Phase 2 construction closure of the Cummings Road landfill was completed in October of 2015. Closure review and certification from the Humboldt County Local Enforcement Agency and the State of California's CalRecycle was completed in February of 2018. Total spent on the Cummings Road landfill and the burn ash site was a little over $12 million, and HWMA is now responsible for ongoing maintenance and monitoring of the site. Reducing waste disposed in landfills start with the decisions that we, as consumers, make. In 2012, the state legislature passed AB 341, which set a statewide diversion goal of 75% by 2020 to be achieved through source reduction, recycling, and continued diversion of materials such as organic waste. To help achieve 75% diversion, HWMA engages in manual removal of material from the waste stream, collects carpet for recycling, and used mattresses and foundations for recovery and recycling. HWMA operates the Eureka Recycling Center for public recycling drop-off, which include containers, appliances, used oil, electronic, and universal waste, and we operate the only CRV buyback center in Eureka. HWMA also manages waste reduction programs on behalf of our member agencies and operates a variety of collection and diversion programs. Beginning in September of 2018, Curbside collected single-stream recyclable materials from HWMA and our participating agencies are now processed locally at Recology's Samoa Resource Recovery Center. Curbside recycling bins contain an overall average of 15% of non-recyclable materials, or garbage. We need your help to get back to basics and to keep garbage out of recycling bins so that we can reduce our cost to recycle and improve the quality of the recyclable materials for market. The list of items that can and cannot be recycled may periodically change due to technological advancements and market price fluctuations of recycled goods and raw materials. Fortunately, now that our jurisdictions are using the same recycling sort facility, the same materials are accepted, so there will be less confusion about what is or what is not recyclable. Curbside residents are not required to sort recyclables into separate glass, plastics, and paper bins, but can place the materials commingled into a single bin. Employees and equipment at the Samoa sorting facilities will do the sorting for us. When in doubt, throw it out. And then do some research about what you should have done so that you can do it right the next time. Wishful recycling is usually just contamination. Rinse and dump before recycling. It doesn't have to be pristine, but even a little food residue or liquid left in the container could cause it and other items to end up in the landfill. Toss loose items into recycling bins. Don't tie up recyclables in plastic bags because plastic bags themselves are not recyclable, and frankly, the sorters don't know if they are opening a bag of recyclables, trash, or even used baby diapers. So there are a couple of updates to this video. This video was originally produced in 2018, and there have been a few significant changes that need updating. And frankly, I haven't had the time in the short turnaround between receiving Jane's phone call if I could step in for this. But the four changes are this. First, due to the COVID pandemic, the Eureka Recycling Center's CRV buyback activities were initially suspended, and then service was ceased in October of 2020. Today, Hambro Recycling is providing CRV buyback at their Arcata site on South G Street, and they will be expanding soon to Willow Creek and into Southern Humboldt. I believe Redway, but I'm not 100% sure of that. During the same time period, Blue Lake Garbage was sold to Humboldt Sanitation. So we now only have 2 franchise haulers plus Tom's Trash up in Willow Creek. The contamination rate in recycling from curbside collected materials. At the time that we were initially starting the curbside recycling program, we were seeing about 15% contamination in the recycling bins. Today, that is actually closer to 23%, and on some routes higher than 30%. And so this is an area that we've been working with the city of Eureka and Arcata, as well as Recology, in order to identify where sort of the problem areas are and do some additional outreach and education of the residents in that area. And then in May of 2022, the HWMA board approved the closure of the Eureka Recycling Center in its entirety, effective August 1st. And the intent at that time was to repurpose the facility for organics collection. And frankly, we're going to have a larger conversation about that in just a bit. But if there's anybody that would have any questions pertaining to the preceding section, I'm happy to answer them. And I'm going to keep this PowerPoint up for the very simple reason I don't know that I can get it off right.
I just asked, how can we lower the contamination rate by encouraging people to clean their recyclables and only put them in when dry, to avoid clamshells and understand when something is marked, like when you get grapes or something in a clamshell, that they apparently aren't recyclable anymore, or egg cartons that are made out of plastic. How do we know which ones are actually recyclable so we don't waste our money and everybody's time by putting them in recycling?
Oh, absolutely. It's a great question. And you'll note that underneath the resource links, I've got one for Recology. And this will take you to what they call what bin. And so if you type in the type of material that you're wanting to dispose of, it will provide you a response around where that material can go. So green waste would go to, obviously your green waste container. If it's a solid waste, it'll direct you to solid waste. And if it's recycling, it'll tell you what types of recyclables are actually recyclable. One of the things that Linda Wise, she's the general manager, and myself have really encouraged is that when you have clean, dry materials with that recycling number on it, put it into your recycling bin. The market has been in a state of fluctuation since the national sword passed in 2018, and certainly there were a number of reverberations throughout the commodities market, and it's been a little bit of a challenge for the industry as a whole to adapt. If Recology, because they're our primary broker now of the material, if they were to say, oh, we get good prices for this, so don't put that other kind of material over here, we don't want to do that. We want to make sure that people get into the habit of clean, dry, and recyclable into their bins, because the higher quality it is, the higher the likelihood is of finding an appropriate market to get it into. So the easiest thing to do for right now is take a look at what bin. And if there's a particular material that you're having challenges with, reach out to either Linda Wise with Recology, or feel free to contact myself or Eric Keller-Heckman. He is also with HWMA.
So if something says it's recyclable, you should really investigate to make sure it's recyclable. Is that the bottom line?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because it may not be. Are there certain numbers that are more recyclable than others?
There are certain numbers that are always easy. 1 and 2 is typically the highest. The issue really comes down to there are some recyclable materials that are very small, and they're very specialized. And in order to get a full truck, to get it to market, it takes a long time to store up enough volume to get it to that specialized market. So that's why, Linda and I in our conversations, if it says it's recyclable, it's clean and it's dry, put it into the curbside recycling bin, and we're going to find a way to, get it into a market. Recology has facilitated a number of relationships with markets that have not necessarily been dependent upon the China market. Now, that being said, when there's an opportunity to find an appropriate broker and somebody who's able to recycle it, they're constantly working to secure adequate recycling abilities. And now that the commodities market as a whole is beginning to kind of recover from that immediate door closing, a lot of materials had gone into the negative, if you will. So an example I'll use is aluminum. So if you had gone back to about 2015, you had a pound of aluminum. It was just scrap aluminum. It was about $1.75. $1.75, and I'm going to suddenly have a blank on my thing. Okay, $1.75 a pound. That was the value. Shortly after 2018, that value plunged to about 32 cents. And so that's a high value material. Plastics went negative. So what began to happen is that a lot of places that were doing recycling and they were sorting out that material, if it was costing them more money to get it into a market for recycling, they would direct it for the garbage. That was not the case with Recology, but that did indeed happen in a lot of locations, primarily in Oregon and Washington. So it's not a one size fits all kind of industry, and everybody's developed their own relationships and contracts with different brokers and recyclers. So it's, you can't sort of characterize that, oh, this is garbage or this is recyclable and it's all getting thrown into garbage. So that's been a real challenge for us during this period. So we've just tried to keep it really simple. If it's got a number on it and it's recyclable, it's clean and it's dry, not a full bottle of salad dressing like you saw, and to get it in there. Kind of on a humorous note, but not humorous, you wouldn't believe the material that comes into the sort line. And if you ever have an opportunity to participate in one of the open house days that Recology does out at the small facility, it'll be pretty eye-opening to see what people are putting into the recycling bins. They're putting in fur coats, they put in guns. I mean, the number of items that will come through. And Linda just sent me another picture last week. Oh, we found a load, a 45. It was not loaded, thankfully, but it was in good shape. So it's just crazy to see what people are putting into the recycling bins, thinking somewhere, somehow, somebody is going to pull it out and use it for something else. So, we've just tried to keep it as simple as we can in terms of that recycling, clean, dry, and with that recycling number on it.
What about what currently happens with glass, wine bottles, jars, etc.?
So that material is going primarily to a glass processing facility, which is located in San Leandro.
Okay. And what can we do with tiny pieces of plastic to keep them out of the oceans?
Tiny pieces of plastics to keep them out of the ocean. I mean, well, ideally, they're not getting into the ocean. People are actually recycling, at the forefront. Because I think it'll be a pretty significant challenge to tease out what the plastic type is, it's probably better to go ahead and place it into the solid waste. There are about 42,000 types of plastic, and not all of that plastic is readily recyclable. So if there's a question as to whether or not that plastic is recyclable, then it should be put into the garbage so as not to serve as a contaminant.
I find it interesting. You can have a pill bottle or a vitamin bottle, and the bottle itself has a recyclable on it, But what about the cap?
They're considered recyclable.
So you just keep it on the bottle, or is it better if it's taken off?
It's usually better if you can keep the caps on the bottle.
Okay. I mean, these are the kind of dumb questions I have. But I
Yeah.
mean, it's like, okay, I have a cardboard box that got dirty on the bottom. Do I put that in the trash?
Kind of
Because it
depends
has,
on what does dirty mean. Does it mean it's been soaking up some motor oil on your floor of your carport, or does it mean it just has a little bit of dirt?
it has a little bit of food waste, like a leaky pear.
So that will typically dry, but if it's greasy like a pizza, it's contaminated and needs to go into the garbage or out into your garden.
Yeah, cool. Okay, well, these are the kinds of crazy questions you end up with when you're trying to sort. Okay, thank you very much. Any other
You're
questions
welcome.
anybody has? Okay, on we go.
Okay. So so there are like 5 comments in the chat button. So those are all good?
Yeah,
Okay. All right. So let's move into the big one. SB 1383. This is the short-lived climate pollutant reduction strategy. And the sources of these pollutants include petroleum-based transportation fuels, agriculture, waste disposal, and gases that are used for refrigeration, air conditioning, and cooling system. And so they typically fall into this black carbon, fluorinated, and methane gases. SB 1383 is state law, and the coordinated implementation is by the California Air Resources Board, and they are working with state agencies, as well as the California Department of Food and Agriculture and CalRecycle. And of course, we're going to be focusing on the CalRecycle component. SB 1383 is the most significant pollutant reduction mandate to be adopted in California in the last 30 years, and the impacts to solid waste services and its solid waste services, excuse me, and it's going to revolutionize how California is disposing of organics material by requiring organics waste recycling in nearly every jurisdiction using a variety of prescriptive strategies. Smaller jurisdictions such as Blue Lake, Ferndale, Rio Dell, and Trinidad were allowed temporary compliance waivers, but they're only for 2 years, and they are still required to meet AB 1826 mandatory commercial organics recycling. And this is all tied to the volume of organics, which is generated by the business. There are no waivers for larger jurisdictions, and all jurisdictions are mandated to adequately resource and fund the required programs. The reduction strategies are achieved through edible food recovery, capacity planning, organics and recycling collection and processing, education and outreach, contamination monitoring, and procurement. And so the procurement in this case is basically creating a market for the material that has been composted typically. And this is our second video.
Even though California is flourishing in many ways, we are also facing greater challenges than ever due to climate change. Cyclical droughts, intense fire seasons, and pollution endangers human health and the environment. In California, we're doing something about it.
Governor Jerry Brown today signed a bill regulating emissions from landfills to fight climate change.
The organics law calls on the state's 40 million residents, its businesses, and every level of government to combat climate change by getting food, green waste, and other organics out of our landfills and get more good food to the 1 in 8 Californians, including the 1 in 5 children who are food insecure. At 23 million tons, organics are by far the largest material type landfilled in California each year. Fortunately, yard, food, and other organic waste can be recycled into compost and renewable natural gas. 1383 requires new rules and regulations to achieve a 50% reduction in organic waste disposal by 2020, a 75% reduction by 2025, and actions to make sure 20% of currently disposed edible food is redirected to Californians in need. Enforcement begins once the law takes effect on January 1st, 2022. Achieving these targets demands a new approach and substantial new investments to restructure the waste management system of the world's fifth largest economy. CalRecycle began rulemaking immediately after the law's passage in 2016. Jurisdictions should start planning now to meet the law's requirements.
1383 will affect every resident and every business in the state of California. CalRecycle is here to help local governments understand and implement this new program.
Start planning now to connect large food waste generators with your local food recovery organizations to help feed hungry people where you live. Start planning now to expand organic waste collection to all homes and businesses in your area and increase your local capacity to recycle this material. Start planning now for rate changes to fund these efforts, new ordinances for mandatory recycling and enforcement, and changes to existing franchise agreements or hauler permit.
Some of this is new and some of it requires more of what you've already been doing, but all of it requires planning now to make sure programs are in place by January 1, 2022.
Recycling organic waste is an essential part of the state strategy and one of the most cost-effective ways every Californian can reduce their own greenhouse gas footprint. Together, California will create a more sustainable future, combat climate change, feed more Californians, and improve the health of our people and our planet. CalRecycle is your committed partner in this effort. Get in touch with us to learn more about available support and resources to help you succeed. And talk to your staff about strategies for the next steps for 1383 implementation.
So in terms of what is happening here on the North Coast pertaining to implementation of 1830, I'm getting them all backwards, 1383, there have been a number of activities. I do want to just make a quick reminder that at the end of the presentation, I'll make sure that you all have the links so you can take a look at the videos if you want to see them again, but probably more importantly, when you get into that CalRecycle link, you'll also see where you can get into some additional educational resources that CalRecycle has put together. It's probably the best that I've seen them actually provide thus far. So implementation of SB 1383 and the establishment of the organics collection services is predicated on the state's assumption that communities have existing organics processing infrastructure. And there have been several efforts that have been made by HWMA over the years to further this. In 2003, HWMA entered into a private-public partnership for the development of Mad River composting. A lot of folks will know them by their more common name, which is West Green Landscaping, which is now West Green Company today. And HWMA invested in the environmental review, the permitting, infrastructure, and the commitment of green waste material, which was collected by the Hawthorne Street Transfer Station, as well as the residential drop-off program by the city of Arcata and the Arcata residents, which has all gone to this privately owned facility. The business is privately owned and it does provide service under a processing agreement with HWMA, and it is not permitted to receive or process food waste. And that was underneath the original permitting process in 2003. In 2005, 5 years before the passage of SB 1383, HWMA partnered with the city of Eureka and Humboldt State University to develop a food waste collection and diversion pilot project. HWMA received a $200,000 EPA Climate Showcase Communities Grant, and we provided matching funds to staff and provided the resources to examine and assess the cost and logistics that were associated with food waste diversion in a variety of commercial settings within the Eureka community. This entailed considerable planning and training and education of not just HWMA staff, but also the owners and employees of about 60 participating eateries and restaurants. Implementation of the collection pilot began in 2012 with Recology dedicating a retrofitted collection truck and food waste collection route, with all of the food waste then hauled to HWMA's transfer station, where it was placed into a bunker, which you can see illustrated here. This was the first week that the program was taken on. Arcata City Garbage transported HSU's food waste material to our facility, and then the materials were manually screened by HWMA employees for the removal of contaminated materials such as plastic packaging, utensils, cutlery, and just roundabout trash. And then they were loaded into bins and transported to Cold Creek Compost, which is located in Ukiah, for composting. We diverted about 36 tons per week of organics during the pilot project for a total of 760 tons of organic waste material during that pilot project period. And that does not include soiled paper or drywall. Quick note on the photograph. As I noted, this was the first week of the pilot project kickoff. And the two piles represent actually a sorted pile, and the one that's off to the right there, that was about 6 hours of work of picking through the trash that had come off from the other side. So that was, it was pretty labor intensive, and it did help to inform a lot of information that we garnered out of here. So at the conclusion of the pilot project, the City of Eureka Council was asked in December of 2013 whether to expand the pilot project into a permanent commercial food waste collection program. And the Eureka City Council members at that time declined to establish the collection service due to the additional collection routes, the long distance transportation, and the overall higher disposal cost as compared to conventional landfilling. Humboldt State University at that time continued to work on food waste collection on a more localized level, and they had utilized an in-vessel composter, and they sent their material to the worm guy for processing. I use the past tense for the very simple reason of I'm not certain what their current collection and processing services are. I know that they continue to do something. I just don't know the specifics at this juncture. So alongside the 18-month pilot food waste diversion project, HWMA also undertook efforts to develop an anaerobic digester and its related infrastructure. We worked with the City of Eureka as well as other member agency staff, and we conducted a site study for property which is located at Hillficker Lane, which is adjacent to the City of Eureka's wastewater treatment plant, and performed environmental review. We also entered into a $100,000 contract with HDR Engineering so that we could develop an anaerobic digester request for proposals. And they were also to provide assistance to HWMA's Technical Advisory Committee once we received those proposals. The RFP was circulated, and we received 6 responsive proposals that were ranked in late 2013. With the decision of the City of Eureka in December to decline establishment of the food waste collection service, and none of the other member agency staff supporting the establishment of route collection services or to commit to organic waste processing, HWMA was unable to proceed with the development of an anaerobic digester. At the time, the related infrastructure development proposals conservatively range between $4 and $8 million to construct, and that did not include securing permits, collection routes, or annual operational cost. And today, of course, we know that those costs will be significantly higher. During that time, HWMA also evaluated the purchase of Mad River hardwoods, and we initiated negotiations, but staff was directed to withdraw in 2016 because the owners of the facility had decided to retire and to sell the operations to their son. Shortly after, we began the evaluation of HWMA properties on Cummings Road. So as noted in the video, we've got the Cummings Road landfill, and we also have the adjacent 400 acres of timber property surrounding that. So we work with consultants to identify some potentially suitable sites on those properties that could potentially accommodate green waste and organics for processing. But again, as with the anaerobic digestion project, without estimated organic waste tonnage from member agencies, we weren't even able to proceed with preliminary siting or designs. Not sure what's happening here. So HWMA in 2020, we conducted a waste characterization study in 2020 and 21 to assist in providing data for those recoverable edible foods present in municipal waste, as well as the estimated organics percentage being landfilled. Just a real quick note, we did a wet weather sampling, which kicked off on February 3rd, which was just before the entire state went into a shutdown. And so we did have a slight delay, and then we were able to complete the study in 2021 once we were able to get the contractors back on site. The organic tonnage information was expected to help quantify whether there was a measurable reduction of organics disposed since our last waste reduction study in 2011. And it was expected to assist in the potential sizing of a regional organics processing facilities should member agencies agree to commit to tonnage for capacity planning and processing. The report was about $150,000 to have completed. About the same time, the cities of Arcata, Eureka, Humboldt State, and Food for People entered into a joint grant in order to take a look at the opportunities for increasing food rescue. And the project was delayed in part due to the pandemic, but honestly, some really good work came out of the effort. I don't have a copy of the final report. The one that I had was shortly before I left, and they had the third quarter report in December of 2020, and they had identified that during that quarter, over 46,000 pounds of food had been rescued from Costco, Eureka Natural Foods, Murphy's Market, Oro Wheat, Walmart, St. Joe's Hospital, and some local farmers market. And that material was able to be recovered and then directed to Food for People and OSNAP, which is a program which is operated on HSU's campus. During this time, Cal Recycle finalized their rulemaking process for 1383 in November of 2020. And the Humboldt County Solid Waste Local Task Force created the SB 1383 Ad Hoc Committee in early 2021 to develop compliance strategies. The local jurisdictions also kicked off some public outreach activities and messaging to encourage source reduction and home and business composting, and HWMA purchased and we provided composting bins to our member agencies, as well as making it available at the public for low cost. So as noted in the video, regulatory compliance is the responsibility of individual jurisdictions. They may and are encouraged to coordinate regionally where able. And in June of 2021, local task force members requested that HWMA act in a limited regional capacity in order to enable the coordinated management and development of a regional compliance plan. And the HWMA Board of Directors agreed. It was generally expected that with the agreement of the governing bodies, and that would be the city councils and the board of supervisors, that HWMA could then act to facilitate regional organics processing, provided that one, we had an agreement to assume regional role with the participating members, that we could secure the material in what we call flow control, that there would be an identification of a preferred project, and that project development would be accomplished through either the solicitation of a request for proposal for the private development or processing services, or that HWMA would develop the infrastructure, or that there would be the development of the infrastructure through a public-private partnership. And it was at this juncture that I retired in November of 2021. And at that moment, it was really bittersweet because it was really exciting to have spent the last couple of years with some new jurisdictional staff, and they were actively pulling together, and they were thinking regionally around how we can jointly meet some of the big challenges that were ahead of us. And SB 1383 compliance was going to be such a heavy and rewarding lift. And it was really exciting to see all that coming together. And then I get to say on November 28th, I'm retiring now. Good luck for all of you. So in June was when we received the request, and we secured a contract with a consultant on November 11th. And then the new executive director began on November 29th. The plan was to provide 5 key deliverables for these tasks of compliance plan, roadmap, organics, processing and collection, an edible food recovery plan, procurement, and a waste management structure. This actually was pertained to the waste management fee structure, because we were going to be looking at having to do a lot of work on the reconfiguration of our rate structure. So as noted, the 2 key deliverables were these reports. The administrative review for these plans and studies were presented to the local task force members in February of 2016, and it was expected that the plans would be completed by May of 2022, and that there would then be the presentation of the plan to the board, and then they could make the next determinations that were necessary. There were a few missteps during the time period, beginning with the closure of the Eureka Recycling Center as a project prior to the final plan being presented. And there were delays in the original time frame, which resulted in the plans actually coming forward in October of 2022. There were representations to our member agencies that HWMA had available funding and could complete infrastructure upgrades by January of 2023. And ultimately, several contracted tasks are remaining incomplete, or they weren't completed at all because the consultant exhausted their funding in June of this year. And that information was not brought forward to the board of directors. Fortunately, some of the key jurisdictional compliance steps were completed, including the 5-year waivers for eligible low population communities, which included Blue Lake, Ferndale, Rio Dell, and Trinidad. This helps to keep them in compliance with SB 1383. The targeted tonnage analysis was also completed. However, and that was they had anticipated about 37,000 tons by 2025, but that doesn't constitute a 15-year organics capacity study, so that we would need for the purposes of developing infrastructure planning and design. The AB 619 notice of intent applications were submitted by March 1st. And that was for the cities of Arcata, Eureka, Fortuna, and the county of Humboldt, because they were not going to be compliant with SB 1383 by January of 2022. So this bought them an additional year. It could have been longer, but they said a year. And then, of course, there was the initial jurisdiction compliance report, which is also due to CalRecycle by April 1st. And then ordinance development. And so a model ordinance, which was developed for Alameda County Waste Management Authority, was provided to our local jurisdictions in Humboldt. The County of Humboldt has completed their amended solid waste ordinance, and the cities are actively reviewing their ordinances for amendment today. In the late summer, the HWMA Board of Directors determined that a change of leadership in the organization was necessary, and they appointed Eric Keller-Heckman, who was our Director of Operations, as the interim executive director on August 19th. And I was asked shortly thereafter if I would return in a limited capacity to help get this effort back on track. And today, Eric and I are charged with picking up the effort and providing the assurance to our jurisdictions and staff, and we're evaluating different pathways and options so that we can move forward. The first step was to present the reports in a public forum for the review and acceptance by the board of directors. So at the October 14th meeting, the board did accept the two reports. The first one was the Humboldt County Edible Food Recovery Study and the SB 1383 Compliance Roadmap. I want to note that the Edible Food Recovery Study is a solid comprehensive document, and it details the Tier 1 and Tier 2 food generators and which city and county staff will be able to utilize as they're working on some compliance related efforts. There was a meeting that started this morning at 11:30 that obviously I'm not able to attend, but I know that this is one of the topics of conversation, and I believe that the local jurisdictions are wanting to work also in a regional coordinated manner for purposes of the edible food recovery activities. So there are, with respect to the SB 1383 roadmap, compliance roadmap, excuse me, that we are simply just not able to correct. And I got to tell you, it was really difficult to lay out, and it still is difficult to lay out, even though we've had to do this, and really difficult for our board and jurisdictional staff to hear of the document's deficiencies. And what they're comprised of is there was a lack of short-term alternatives and long-term options. There was a lack of methodology and assumptions to describe how the tonnage projections were generated. So we don't have a lot of confidence around that 37,000 ton number. There was a lack of secured funding for the infrastructure improvements related to the relocation of the Eureka Recycling Center and the repurposing of the former Eureka Recycling Center for the organics collection and pre-processing. Jurisdictions currently lack the approved amendments to the franchise service agreements so that their franchise haulers could even order the trucks. And right now there's a 2-year delivery wait just because of supply demand issues. There have been some operational changes at West Green West Green Company's green waste processing. And that means the document that was developed no longer reflects some of the early assumptions that were built into the proposed plan. And then, of course, what was overlooked in the plan was the importance of securing flow control of the organic material prior to assuming financial and infrastructure commitments. And no preliminary flow control commitments and no financial analysis means that HWMA right now can't even provide a ballpark estimate for what the changes would look like in terms of our disposal fees. So what is flow control? HWMA's members agreed through the joint power agreement to commit flow control of solid waste and direct that solid waste to HWMA. And this is demonstrated through, one, the development of an ordinance or either actual adoption or an amendment, and then to dedicate the flow control to HWMA through the franchise hauler contract. So basically, the ordinance says when that material is at the curb, it's the city's responsibility to decide what happens to it, and then they enter into an agreement with the franchise hauler, and then the franchise hauler is told, and you will send that material to HWMA or one of our designated and contracted facilities. So the flow control then allows HWMA to leverage that material tonnage to secure competitive pricing for the transportation and other services because it's providing certainty and assurance to the contractor. In addition, it allows us to spread capital cost over a greater tonnage volume over the life of a project. In order to secure any sort of financing, we need to demonstrate that we're going to have X volume of material for X period of time so that we could even get a loan or a bond of some sort to finance the development of infrastructure. HWMA's Joint Powers Agreement purpose is detailed, and it identifies that the authority may develop and fund programs, site, permit, construct, and operate processing facilities, including transfer stations, material recovery facilities, composting, and other operations. So we have a number of tools that we can pick up. However, the Joint Powers Agreement only secured flow control of solid waste and not source separated material, which is what recyclables, green waste, organics, and other materials are. And this is where we have, kind of hit a wall when we have tried to move forward with other projects pertaining to source separated waste. So SB 1383 compliance is the responsibility of the jurisdictions, and there is a recognition by staff members that developing a regionalized approach enables efficiencies of scale and reduces administrative redundancies. What I don't think a lot of staff members appreciated at the time that SB 1383 was moving forward is that CalRecycle built in a lot more teeth, and they hired an enforcement staff of 48 new people to bring jurisdictions into compliance. And this is a dramatic shift from previous waste reduction regulations, which were more of sort of a demonstration of goodwill, if you will. So it was a little bit fuzzy, and it'd be really great if you could get this number up better. Frankly, with some of the changes, it's really critical that our region develop a well-designed, integrated, and resilient system, which is going to be cost-effective for ratepayers. HWMA is committed to supporting a regionalized approach to organics processing. And at the October 14th meeting, the board is requesting the governing bodies of each jurisdiction to submit a letter of interest that HWMA act in a regional capacity for the purposes of regional organics processing, and that they be willing to support an amendment so that we can secure that control of source separated materials. As noted, the cities of Trinidad and Fortuna are not members of the authority, but we're asking that those non-member entities also express a willingness and initiate steps to join HWMA. And then we also received directions so that we can initiate the drafting of an amended language so that we can get that flow control before the board. I liken our current position as we're pushing the truck up the hill and we are rebuilding the engine. And at HWMA staff level, we are assessing our current position to evaluate the most appropriate pathways forward so that we can provide that assistance to local jurisdictions with SB 1383 compliance. We are also working to develop and to present short and long-term proposals and alternatives to the HWMA board and the local task force in the upcoming months. We can't change what's happened in the last year, but we're just doing our best to persevere forth. So one of the things that I think is really important is, how can you all be helping? There are some pretty straightforward approaches. One is the reduction of food waste, avoid buying too much, storing food correctly, refrigerate or freeze leftovers, to take the to-go box from the restaurants after you've eaten out and, have them for a lunch the next day, to compost your food scraps. For those who are able and they have adequate space, carrying an apple core and kitchen scraps to your backyard composter or vermiculture area requires a lot less energy and resources than route trucks and processing infrastructure. And we really encourage people to be donating the edible surplus food to their local food pantries, and to support the purchase and use of locally produced compost. One of the reasons that the West Green Landscaping is having some significant challenges is that green waste volume coming in is going up, and they've got a lot of composted material. And with the decline of the cannabis industry and even some of the local farmers, there's no longer a demand for the final product. But in the meantime, we're, and I find myself doing this too. Oh, I need one bag of some soil for my raised beds, and it's just easier to grab that bag from the local market. I got to completely rethink how I'm doing this, and we need to be looking at locally produced compost products instead of bringing that material in from the Central Valley and purchasing it here. So trying to use locally produced compost whenever possible. And we're certainly hoping that folks, taking the first step here, becoming more informed, but also being willing to express your support to your local elected officials. And concludes our presentation today. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the PowerPoint, which means I'm not going to be able to go back to it very easily, but let's do this. And then we can open it up for some questions.
We have a number of questions in the chat.
Okay.
Has there been an effort to send postcards to garbage customers to inform them of what is truly recyclable?
So that's going to be an issue that is between the city, who's holding the contract, and the solid waste hauler. And so I can't speak to that at all. I know that there have been differing attempts, oops tags and whatnot like that. And it's been dependent. The city of Eureka has actually been pretty aggressive about working with their recycling hauler. Can't really speak to the other entities as well.
There used to be little tags that went on the bins that told you what was what, and those seem to have disappeared.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that I can bring up in our next conversation.
Okay. And then how about sharps and test strips? Don't those go back to your local pharmacy?
So sharps containers, as well as the test strips, they can get put into sharps containers, and they can be dropped off either at HWMA's household hazardous waste facility, or at some of the pharmaceutical locations. I believe that the Adorney Center and a few other locations, which are located on the HWMA website, if you go into HWMA and look for sharps disposal, it'll give more specific sites. We keep that updated because that does change periodically. Not often, but periodically.
And then when something says it's compostable, how do we know that if it's compostable in our backyards or only in a commercial compost facility? And can we tell?
Yeah, that is something that we actually can't tell. And that has served as a bit of a challenge. So I can't really speak to it because theoretically it is compostable. The question is how much time, and that's going to vary with the individual items. So I'm afraid I can't really speak to it. It will break down eventually.
We just don't know whether it's a month or
just don't know when. Yeah.
We live in the county south of Eureka. We just have small gray trash bin that we pull a quarter mile to the main road for trash pickup. Are we required to have other bins as well?
That is something that the county is working on. There are certain areas in the county, certain communities that are able to also get the low population waiver from Cal Recycle, and not knowing specifically what area you're in. I couldn't really speak to it at the moment, but I will say the county staff is working on how they will be amending their franchise or their franchise agreements to enable the collection of recyclable, green waste, and solid waste in those areas.
So is it better to get, when we're, for example, in Arcata, we can take our green waste to West Greens at no charge, but is it better actually to get a green waste bin now? Or is it a compostable bin? What are the green ones?
Yeah, well, the green ones are going to be used for green waste and theoretically organics. But again, West Green Landscaping cannot take any food waste. So this is one of the issues that the plan didn't appreciate. So they were thinking, oh, everybody can just throw their green waste into the bin. It's like, but they're not permitted to accept green waste. So somebody's going to have to pick all of that food waste out of the green waste before it gets sent. So it was a fatal flaw, one of a few. And so I'm not going to actually comment on whether that's a thing right now, because we really need to work out those details.
Have you considered establishing another task force in order to try to address and get additional assistance from the public that might want to engage helping you? Because you indicated there's staff issues trying to keep up with the demand for more staff and the unavailability?
You know, right now, I think the member jurisdictions are feeling a lot of pressure to be able to move forward. So what I'm wanting to really encourage is there be a higher level of engagement with respect to our board, so we can get more information to the board, which then opens it up, you know, into a forum where the public can participate. And so for the short term, I think that's going to probably be the route that we'll take. And then as we start talking about larger and longer term projects, that we can start pulling in more community review. Again, this was actually something that was built into the contract, that there'd be a series of community meetings so that we could solicit you know, some of the thoughts, and, you know, people being able to identify you know, things that should be taken into consideration when we're looking at a design. But those meetings didn't occur. They didn't even occur really with the hauling partners. So that's been a disappointment.
Oh, I can imagine. Wendy Robertson said, I moved here from Castro Valley and had food waste added to our yard waste bin for pickup weekly. This went back at least 10 to 12 years. I guess there were just more people living in the Bay Area, so it was doable and made financial sense. And do we have that issue because of our lower population?
Well, it's a couple of things. One is that for the green waste and organics composting, which was occurring primarily in the San Francisco area, you were utilizing your franchise hauler, which is Recology. They owned both a landfill and they also had an organics processing facility that was developed early on. They were really, you know, at the forefront of a lot of this movement. And so it was pretty groundbreaking when the city of San Francisco decided to move into putting food waste into those containers. They developed their processing facility so that it could take both that food waste as well as the green waste, which is, you know, woody debris, and it doesn't break down as fast as regular food waste. And so they developed a series of processing systems to handle that material. For us, it has not been a lack of trying for HWMA, because we too saw that on the horizon, but it kept coming back to this issue of flow control. And unless and until the jurisdictions are willing to make that commitment to provide that material, how does HWMA go forward with the financing and the design for something that is just completely unknown? So this has been a hard year for a lot of folks, realizing all of these things.
Sounds like it. Are the edible food recovery activities continuing today, and how are they being funded?
The edible food recovery activities are happening today. So, you know, Food for People has been, you know, one of these very quiet heroes that have been operating very well in our community. What's really different now is that you're seeing more participation by a lot of the grocers like Eureka Natural Foods and the co-op and all these places, because they are now directing that material. They are under the state mandate to be directing recoverable food material into those pantries. So they're like the tier one, right? So then the tier two are, well, what about those restaurants that have food at the end of the evening? You know, is that now just getting tossed out into the back? Well, that material actually needs to also get fed into the food recovery process. And that's part of what that document helps to tease out and identify where there's some opportunities.
Okay. It seems like we, or folks acting in our names, have procrastinated, snafu'd ourselves into quite a corner.
I've got nothing to add to that. I would agree.
Yeah. And it sounds like we need to renegotiate our HWMA contracts and agreements with
That is correct.
haulers and everybody else. Are they open to those renegotiations?
That is the question that is being asked of the jurisdictions. So after our board meeting, and we had a number of staff that were there, I know that the city of Rio del staff put a letter onto the agenda, and it's already been approved by their council. So it was like Friday, They knew what they needed to do. They got it onto the agenda. They approved it Monday night. It was amazing. So it was like, okay, they really want to go. And so the other jurisdictions have been asked, and I'm aware of 3 thus far that have got the items onto the agendas, and that is beginning to move forward now. So this is just for the amendment of the Joint Powers Agreement, and the cities are all also working with their franchise hauler as well as the county to amend their franchise agreements, collection agreements.
And what are the penalties for non-compliance, and when do they start to kind of kick our butt?
Oh, they're already pressuring city staff and the county staff. They're meeting with them pretty regularly. And mandatory compliance fines, I believe, start in 2024.
So we have a little time.
Hopefully.
But not much.
We don't really have time, because they want to see that there's measurable progress which is occurring now. So that's why, as Eric and I are putting things together, if we can demonstrate that people are actually pulling together and working regionally, then that counts towards, you're demonstrating that you're taking steps to secure the services as well as the processing.
I mean, what kind of penalties do they have? Just fines that each of the
They are
jurisdictions have to pay, or
fines.
what?
They are fines, and they are not insignificant. They are like $10,000 a day.
Ooh,
So
ouch. Okay. Why did Trinidad and Fortuna decline to join HWMA in the first place? If they still refuse to join, will they be penalized separately from the other HWMA members?
that's a lot of old history. So once upon a time, HWMA was known as the Humboldt County Waste Management Authority, and it was comprised of 7 of the 8 jurisdictions. I actually can't speak as to why Trinidad never actually joined the authority. There have been interest levels over the years. But just taking that next step, and I think a lot of it is really rooted in the fact that it's a very small city. They don't have a lot of staff. They have a part-time city manager, and they've only had a couple of part-time city managers. And when HWMA was initially formed, they didn't have a city manager. It was city council members that were acting in sort of commissioner roles. Trinidad currently has an agreement with Humboldt Sanitation. I don't actually think it would take too much effort this go round in order to move forward. Fortuna was a different story. Fortuna sued the Humboldt County Waste Management Authority because there was a dispute over the Cummings Road landfill and who was responsible for the closure cost. Because they argued that they didn't dispose as much material into the facility. That was a point where it was stymied for a number of years. A lot of sort of old memories, not letting kind of the past be the past, and everybody was just really concerned about the potential for this open-ended liability so long as that landfill remained open. It wasn't taking solid waste, but it was considered an open landfill until it was certified closed. The landfill is closed now. It's certified closed. So that's no longer going to be an issue for Fortuna. Last April, Merritt Perry, he's the city manager. One of the things that we talk about is, we really hate when City of Fortuna residents come into HWMA, we have to charge them a rate when they're bringing their hazardous materials. So of course, I actually think the the unincorporated county portion of Carlotta has probably lost a big population because people knew that all they had to say is, I live in Carlotta, and they wouldn't get charged, right? So a lot of material was coming into our facility, and by Fortuna residents who said they were living in the county. And so what Merritt and I worked on is an agreement where Recology, who is their franchise hauler, is collecting the monthly fee for purposes of enabling Fortuna residents to receive HHW disposal at no charge, just like every other jurisdiction here. And I felt like it was a baby step to be able to demonstrate there could be some real benefits in working regionally. And so I don't think that the same barriers exist today that they had prior to, and it sounds like folks in Fortuna may be interested. If Trinidad decides to opt out, it's probably less of an issue. Fortuna is actually a really big deal because they're essentially the third or fourth largest community. So the volume of organic material that they're going to be generating and needing to have treated is not insignificant. So I'm really hoping that folks will see that there could be some benefits in working regionally, and we'll leave that in the hands of the City Council and the residents of Fortuna to see what direction that they'd like to go.
Thank you. And Milton Flegui said the edible food recovery study does not appear to be available online. Is there any easy way to make it accessible to the public?
Kind of. So Dane, if you're there, can you throw into the chat section the links that I sent you? And Milton and everybody else, the two documents are embedded inside the October 14th board agenda. And so the food recovery document is there, as well as the SB 1383 roadmap. And so you'll see those links right there. So go ahead and just cut and copy and you'll be able to get to those links. And then I would presume that Jane or Dane are able to make these available to you as well. They are not currently on HWMA's website as standalone documents. No reason not to. It's just been a matter of Eric and I are doing a lot of triage right now.
I'll bet you are. What to do with unavoidable plastic veggie bags?
Oh, well, this is going to be an interesting thing. It's going to be a couple of years out, but the state of California just passed legislation, and the governor has signed it, that they're basically outlining single-use vegetable plastic bags. That'll be going into effect, I believe, in 2025. So currently, I would say just reuse them. They're actually really fantastic for just basic home use.
Well, I've
I use
noticed
them regularly. I don't.
I've noticed that Eureka Foods has what are allegedly compostable. They feel very strange. And again, it's like, are they really compostable or not? And if so, where should we be putting them? Should we be putting these very interestingly textured bags in our recyclable, or should we put them in the trash?
Almost sounds like it'd be kind of a fun project, demonstration project that somebody from CCAT could take on, right? Take a bunch of material and start exploring what's going to be the higher and best kind of material to use for compostable activities.
Yeah. And then a comment that the worm guy will pick up food waste. And I understand that there's also some kind of a, whether it's a Cooperation Humboldt activity that's in Arcata at the farm, that you can take your compostable food and they will accept that and compost it. Is that the case?
Yeah, that is the case. I had a list at one time. I wouldn't want to share it right now because it's been a couple of years. But for instance, the farm that provides Brio Cafe with a number of their green goods, they will take their kitchen scraps at the end and they bring it back to the farm and they compost it on site. And they're not the only ones. So there's a number of places that restaurants and other eateries have been working with to manage food waste. And we're not talking post-consumer food waste, but we are talking about sort of the end of kitchen food waste materials. So a lot of that was really driven underneath AB 1826. And in that particular legislation, it wasn't the responsibility of jurisdictions, it was the responsibility of businesses to figure out how they were going to manage their organic materials.
All
It's
right,
pretty
are there any
clunky.
other questions? I don't see anything else in the chat. Does anybody else have a question they want to ask? Yay, nay?
I did put another question in the chat.
What did I miss?
The co-op
Oh,
has bags that
wait.
they say are compostable, but they also tell you not to use them to store your veggies. So what's the point?
I couldn't speak to that. I think it would be a great question for the co-op managers to ask about that. And I would ask if, is it a certain kind of storage? Do they break down faster under certain types of produce, such as, let's say onions as compared to grapes? But I don't know. I want to back up and just Patricia Ann Winterson also just identified that film plastics are not recyclable in the blue bins, and that is absolutely correct. That is considered a tangler, actually. Those plastic bags get caught up in the teeth, and it causes the whole production line to kind of come to a stop until they're able to get all that item cleaned out. So those are not to go into the recycling bin. For a little while, the Adorney Center did have a kind of a little box where you could put in plastic bags that were then sent to Trek, and they would incorporate them into their Trek baseboard materials and make benches and things like that out of them. I do have a question from Deborah Dukes pertaining to addressing the proposed dairy farm slurry project for food waste. I actually can't talk about this one too much for the very simple reason that I attended a presentation a little over a year ago that was made to some of the farmers in the Eel River Valley. And they were at the very, very, very early stages of assessing the potential development of anaerobic digesters for dairy waste. My understanding is that effort has continued, but I don't know exactly what that means. That is also a conversation which is happening with the local task force today. But I just couldn't tell you more about that right now because I've been out of the loop for the last year.
Well, Jill, we want to thank you ever so much for this incredibly thorough and amazing presentation, given that you had about 4 days notice.
This was my Saturday. And you're very welcome. I'm really thrilled that people are interested in learning more.
Well, and this will be on the OLLI website and available to all who are interested. So we have fantastic thanks. Thank you and good luck in getting this back on track. You have a big job, and I know you're up to it, even though you're trying to stay part-time. I bet that's difficult. But you want to keep
I've got that horse out there that's waiting for me.
I get it. I know how that works. And I do want to invite everyone on Halloween, October 31st. We're going to have a discussion of the U.S. and the Holocaust, the history and current implications by Amanda Devons, who's a master of social work. And it will focus on the documentary being aired September 18th through 20th on PBS Key TV, and will provide a forum for discussion. So we look forward to seeing you there again. And meantime, look up all this stuff. And if you have questions, be sure about what's recyclable and what's not. Be sure to ask them. And now I'm going to have to tell my husband, yes, I do need to wash all those clamshells so I can recycle them instead of now cutting them up and putting them in the trash. I'm not sure he'll be happy. He said, look at all the water you're wasting.
Put them in the dishwasher. Just as a quick, if you guys haven't already done so, I would really encourage you to consider asking Linda Wise or Frank Nelson to make a presentation from Recology. They are providing most of the recycling sorting services. If you live in McKinleyville, your material is continuing to go to solid waste of Willits. is part of what has made things really challenging because we're not all on the same page. But I think that it would be invaluable to have Linda or Frank be able to answer the questions more specifically about their operations and some of the trends that they are seeing.
That's fantastic. Thank you ever so much, Jill.
You're
For
welcome.
setting
Thank
aside
you
all this
all.
time, and we appreciate it. And we'll look forward to hearing more from you. I suspect we're going to be hearing more in the future.
Anytime. All right. Thank
Okay,
you.
take care, everybody. Thank
Bye-bye.
you. We're all done.
Thank
Danny,
you.
shut us down.